Okay, so I think it's good we start with Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, maliki yawmiddin, iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een, ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim, sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim ghayri al-maghdubi alayhim walad-dallin, sadaqallahu al-aliyyul azim. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعن الله ولا أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. So we're now continuing in our Mahdawiyyah series that we didn't have last week because of the special session on the martyrdom of Imam Khamenei, and I'd like to congratulate all of you and everyone watching on the election of Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei as the third supreme leader of the Islamic Revolution. Inshallah, we pray that Allah grants him tawfiq and success and strength and resilience against all of the plots and schemes against him, and counts him among the most successful and righteous, inshallah. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. So prior to the previous session, we spent 2 sessions examining weapons that poison the land. We traced the prohibition from its Quranic roots through the Prophet's explicit instructions, through 1,000 years of jurisprudential reasoning, to the formal fatwa or edicts of our contemporary scholars. We established that nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, any weapon that cannot distinguish combatant from civilian, that cannot be controlled once it's been deployed, that continues killing after the war has ended, falls under the absolute prohibition articulated 14 centuries ago, which reads, "Do not cast poison into their lands." We witnessed Imam Khamenei refuse to retaliate with chemical weapons, even as Iranian soldiers choked on Saddam's chemical gas provided to him by the French, the British, the Germans, and others from the collective West. We examined Imam Khamenei's formal fatwa, the triad of prohibition covering production, stockpiling, and use of nuclear, biological, and all of these weapons. We surveyed the consensus of the Marajah and found the tradition speaking with one voice. We traced the precision doctrine and saw how the prohibition shaped Iran's actual military development, which we see in play today on our screens and in the world. And we answered the accusation that haunts every discussion, demonstrating that the fatwa cannot be taqiyya because there is no hidden truth that it conceals. The theology of warfare is established. But warfare is not only waged with bombs and missiles. Tonight we turn to a different battlefield and a different kind of poison. There is a weapon that requires no enrichment facility, no chemical precursor, no biological laboratory. It can't be detected by satellites. It can't be interdicted at borders. It can't be destroyed by airstrikes. And yet it can bring down governments, it can shatter societies, turn neighbor against neighbor, and leave nations in ruins as surely as any nuclear blast. And this weapon is information, or rather disinformation. The deliberate corruption of news, of truth. The strategic deployment of lies. The poisoning not of wells, but of minds. Not of soil, but of the capacity to distinguish reality from fabrication. And the martyr Imam Khamenei has spoken of this directly. The influence of media, he has observed, can be greater than the influence of the atomic bomb. A bomb destroys buildings and bodies. The corrupted media, however, destroys something more fundamental. It destroys the shared understanding that makes a society possible. It destroys trust. It destroys the very capacity for a people to reason together, to recognize their common interests, to resist those who would manipulate. Physical poison seeps into the ground and contaminates whatever grows there. Informational poison, however, seeps into the mind and contaminates whatever thoughts grow there. The parallel is not merely metaphorical, it is actually precise. And tonight we examine how Islam addresses this second category of poison with the same rigor, the same attention to sources and detail, the same care for principle that we brought to the first. How does Islam distinguish between legitimate protest and destructive sedition? The citizen has grievances, prices rise, corruption persists, injustice occurs. Does he or she not have the right, even the duty, to speak out, to demand accountability, to insist that those in power answer to those that they serve? Of course, he does. The Quran itself establishes this right. The tradition affirms it. The scholars have articulated it across centuries. But there is a line. On one side of the line stands a citizen who demands justice, who raises his voice, who organizes his neighbors, who holds power accountable. This is what we call i'tiraz, legitimate protest. This falls within the boundary of amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar, which is enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. This is not merely permitted. Indeed, in some circumstances, it can even become obligatory. On the other side of the line, however, stands something entirely different. The agent provocateur, who exploits grievances for destruction. The foreign operative, who hijacks legitimate anger and steers it towards chaos. The rioter who burns the bus that his own community needs, who destroys the bank where his neighbor's savings sit, who tears down the infrastructure that sustains the very people he professes to represent. This is fitna, sedition. This is what we call fasad fil ard, corruption upon the earth. And the Quran's verdict on fitna is unambiguous. It is worse than killing. Now a question comes to mind, how can sedition be worse than killing? It seems quite extreme, but consider. Killing ends one life. Sedition, the deliberate corruption of a society's capacity to function, the shattering of the trust that holds communities together, can destroy the conditions that make millions of lives livable. A single murder, of course, is a tragedy. The collapse of social order, however, is a catastrophe. Tonight, we trace this distinction through the sources. We hear the Quran establish the right of the oppressed to speak, and the prohibition on those who would tear society apart. We examine the classical texts and find the jurists already wrestling with these questions. We learn from history, from Siffin, from the poisoning of Imam Hassan's army, from the patterns that repeat whenever enemies seek to destroy what they cannot defeat on the battlefield. And we hear from the contemporary scholars, the martyr Imam Khamenei, Imam Khamenei, Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi, Ayatollah Jawadi Amoli, Ayatollah Mohsen Araki, and others, who have applied these ancient principles to modern circumstances. Tonight we diagnose the disease. We identify the poison, its nature, its characteristics, its method of operation. We trace how Islam distinguishes legitimate protest from forbidden sedition. We hear from the Quran, the classical sources, the historical record, and the contemporary scholars. We learn to recognize the poison so that we will not unknowingly drink it, so that we will not become instruments of the very destruction that we believe we are opposing. This is essential work. Without diagnosis, there can be no cure. Without recognition, there can be no resistance. But diagnosis is not the end. Next week, God willing, we apply the antidote. We will hear Imam Ali's counsel on how to navigate fitna without being consumed by it. The remarkable teaching of the baby camel that is often misunderstood, that shows the believer how to avoid being exploited by the corrupt. We will distinguish between the instigators of fitna and those who are merely manipulated by it, and understand why the tradition treats each of these two classes differently. We will examine what emerges when the shield is finally lowered, not because the danger has passed, but because a higher calling beckons. The call to makarim al-akhlaq, the noble character. The positive demonstration of faith that is the believer's primary mode when persecution lifts. And we will address the question that many of us in the West must face. Is taqiyya even relevant in Manchester, in Toronto, in Sydney? What is our obligation when we have the freedom our ancestors maybe never had? That is for next week. Tonight, the poison identified. In his name and with full reliance on him, we proceed. Now this week, I'm not going to do a recap because we've done a brief recap, and I invite everyone to read and study the recap in the write-up. We will move straight on to the main section. If I can get a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So, as I said, we've spent 2 sessions establishing why Islam forbids weapons that poison the land. The prohibition rests on 3 characteristics such weapons have. These weapons are indiscriminate. They cannot distinguish between combatant and civilian. They are uncontrollable. Once deployed, they spread according to their own nature. And they are residual. Their harm persists long after the act, punishing generations who had no part in the original conflict. These 3 characteristics, indiscriminate, uncontrollable, and residual, place a weapon outside the bounds of legitimate warfare. They transform it from an instrument of defense into an instrument of dhulm or oppression. Now we must recognize something crucial. These characteristics apply not only to weapons that destroy bodies, they equally apply to weapons that destroy minds. Consider the parallel. Physical poison seeps into the water supply. It cannot distinguish between the soldier who drinks and the child who drinks. It spreads through the aquifer according to its own nature. The one who released it has no control over where it goes. And it remains in the soil, in the water, in the ecosystem, harming those who come after. We see this in the world with depleted uranium and all of this horrible stuff. Information poison seeps into the public mind. It too cannot distinguish between the guilty and the innocent. It infects whoever encounters it, warping their perception, corrupting their judgment. It spreads through social networks, through the media, through conversation. The one who released it also cannot control where it goes or who absorbs it. And it remains in the collective memory, in the assumptions people carry, in the fractured trust that never fully heals. The bomb destroys buildings. The lie destroys the capacity to build. The chemical weapon scars and mutilates the body. The propaganda scars the capacity to reason. And the biological agent spreads from person to person until it has infected an entire population. And the rumor spreads from mind to mind until it has infected a society. As I said before, this parallel is not metaphorical. It is entirely structural and it is precise. And the same principle that forbids one forbids the other. Imam Khamenei, may God rest his soul, has articulated this parallel with characteristic precision. In a meeting with commanders of the armed forces, he stated, and the references of course are in the write-up, he said, "Today the influence of the media is greater than the atomic bomb. You must know this. Today, media can change the destiny of a war, a feat that the atomic bomb cannot achieve." Now consider the weight and gravity of this statement. The atomic bomb is the most destructive weapon humanity has ever created. It can incinerate an entire city in an instant. It can kill hundreds of thousands in a flash. It haunts the nightmares of every generation since Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the US's use of it. And the martyr Imam Khamenei says, the media is more powerful. Why? Because the atomic bomb can destroy a city, but it cannot make the inhabitants of that city destroy themselves. The atomic bomb can kill a population, but it cannot make a population turn against their own interests, betray their own values, and dismantle their own defenses. An atomic bomb can end a war through annihilation, but it cannot make a nation surrender or bend the knee before the war even begins. Convinced by propaganda that resistance is futile, that their cause is unjust, and that their leaders are villains, rumors, propaganda, lies has the potential to do that. Media can do all of this. Media can make a people believe lies about themselves even. It can fracture the unity that makes resistance possible. It can turn neighbor against neighbor, citizen against citizen, citizen against government, faction against faction. Media can win a war without a single shot being fired by convincing the target population to defeat itself. This is why its influence is far greater than that of an atomic bomb. And this is why it must be understood through the same lens we applied to weapons of mass destruction. In another address, this one to the Assembly of Experts in September 2009, in the aftermath of the post-election unrest of the so-called Green Revolution, Imam Khamenei made the parallel even more explicit. He said, "When they use chemical weapons, the effect remains in the bodies. Propaganda and media weapons are exactly the same, casting doubt in the hearts of people, making people pessimistic about each other, making people pessimistic about the officials. These are the chemical weapons of the soft war." The references, of course, are in the write-up. The chemical weapons of the soft war. This is not just poetry. This is doctrine. Now recall what we established about chemical weapons. They leave residue. The mustard gas settles on surfaces and continues to burn whatever or whoever it touches. The nerve agent seeps into the soil and continues to poison whoever contacts with it. The harm does not end when the attack ends. It persists, it waits, it claims victims long after the original deployment. Propaganda operates identically. The doubt that is cast into the heart does not merely evaporate when the broadcast ends. It settles, it remains, it colors every subsequent perception. The pessimism that is cultivated between neighbors does not disappear when the social media post is scrolled past. It lingers. It shapes how they see each other. It fractures the trust that once held them together. The cynicism about officials does not heal when the news cycle moves on. It calcifies. It becomes the default assumption. It makes cooperation impossible. It makes governance impossible. It makes the collective action that any society needs impossible. These are residual effects. These are harms that persist long after the original act. And just as the residual acts of chemical weapons places them in a special category of prohibition, so too does the residual nature of information warfare demand very special consideration. So let us be systematic. Let us apply the three characteristics that define forbidden weapons to the weapons of information warfare. Firstly, indiscriminate. A precision missile can strike a military headquarters while leaving the hospital next door entirely untouched. A lie cannot. When a fabrication is released into the information ecosystem, when a rumor is spread, when a false narrative is planted, when a manipulated image is circulated, it reaches whoever encounters it. The propagandist cannot control who absorbs this poison. The lie reaches the enemy's supporters, but it also reaches the confused, the uncertain, the genuinely seeking. It reaches the young who have not yet formed their views. It reaches the elderly who trust what they read. It reaches the vulnerable who lack the tools to verify. Information poison, like physical poison, cannot and does not distinguish. Secondly, uncontrollable. A commander can order his troops to cease fire. He cannot order a lie to stop spreading. Once disinformation enters the public sphere, it takes on a life of its own. It is shared, repeated, modified, amplified. It spawns variations. It generates responses that themselves become vectors of confusion. The original propagandist may have intended a specific effect, but the lie, once released, operates according to its own dynamics. It may spread further, far further than ever intended, and it may mutate in ways hitherto unforeseen. It may cause harms never calculated. Information poison, like physical poison, cannot be controlled once it has been released. And thirdly, residual. A conventional bomb destroys what it strikes, and then the destruction is complete. The survivors can rebuild, and those who have been killed will be buried. Painful, yes, but fixed. A lie that has been believed is never fully unbelieved. Studies in psychology confirm what common sense suggests. Corrections do not fully undo the effect of misinformation. Even when people are told that something they believed is false, the original false belief continues to influence, even from a nominal perspective, their thinking. The residue remains. A society that has been subjected to sustained information warfare carries the scars long after the warfare ends. The fractured trust, the cultivated suspicions, the instilled cynicism, these do not heal quickly. They may not heal at all within a generation. Information poison, like physical poison, has residual effects that persist long after the original deployment. Now we can see why the theology of warfare leads directly to the theology of dissent. The principle that forbids nuclear weapons is not, do not use this particular technology. The principle is, do not deploy weapons whose nature makes them indiscriminate, uncontrollable, and residual in their harm. Nuclear weapons happen to embody these characteristics in the physical realm. Information warfare, however, embodies the same characteristics in the cognitive domain. The principle that forbids one necessarily addresses the other. This is why the Quran, long before nuclear weapons or mass media existed, addressed both domains. It forbade physical destruction of innocents, and it forbade the spreading of lies and rumors that destroy the social fabric. It prohibited the killing of non-combatants, and it prohibited fitna, which it declared worse than killing. The tradition understood 14 centuries before the internet that the battlefield of the mind is as real as the battlefield of the body, and the same ethics govern both. Please give me a salawat and we proceed. So we've established a category, information poison. This category includes deliberate disinformation, the knowing fabrication and spread of falsehood to achieve political or military objectives. Strategic rumor, the planting of unverifiable claims designed to create doubt, suspicion, and division. Psychological manipulation, the exploitation of legitimate grievances to steer populations towards self-destructive actions. Fitna cultivation, the deliberate mixing of truth and falsehood to create confusion about who is right and who is wrong, who is friend and who is foe. All of these share the three characteristics: indiscriminate in who they affect, uncontrollable once released, and residual in their harm. And all of them fall under the same principle that governs weapons of mass destruction. They are forms of poison. And the Prophet of Islam, peace and blessings be upon him, his family and righteous companions, has said, do not cast poison into their lands. The one who casts information poison into society, the propagandist, the disinformation agent, the cultivator of fitna, is doing what the Prophet explicitly forbade. He or she is poisoning, not wells, but minds, not soils, but the capacity for trust, not water, but the shared understanding that makes a community possible. And the ruling that applies to the poisoner of wells applies to the poisoner of minds. But here is where the theology of dissent becomes complex. The poisoner is very clearly condemned. the one who knowingly spreads lies, who deliberately cultivates chaos, who serves foreign agents and enemies by fracturing domestic unity, this person falls under clear prohibition. But what about the one who believes the lies? What about the citizen who has a genuine grievance? Prices are high, corruption exists, injustice occurs, and who takes to the streets, not knowing that his legitimate anger is being exploited by those who wish to destroy what he wishes to reform? What about the mob that riots, not understanding that they are serving an agenda that will harm them more than any injustice they currently think they suffer? This is the complexity that we must navigate. The sources distinguish clearly between the instigator and the manipulated. The sources distinguish clearly between legitimate protest and destructive sedition. The sources provide guidance for the individual caught in the fog of fitna, how to avoid being used, how to resist manipulation, how to maintain integrity when truth and falsehood are deliberately mixed. These are the questions that await us. The bridge is crossed. We have moved from physical poison to information poison, from the theology of warfare to the theology of dissent. Let us now see what the Quran, the Prophet and the scholars have to say about this second battlefield. Please give me a salawat and we move to the Quranic framework, the right to speak and the prohibition on poison. The Quran addresses both dimensions of our subject. It establishes the right of the oppressed to speak out, to raise their voices, to demand justice, to hold power accountable. And it establishes the prohibition of fitna, on the deliberate corruption of the social fabric, on the spreading of confusion that makes truth indistinguishable from falsehood. Both teachings are essential, and neither can be understood without the other. The one who emphasizes only the right to protest becomes an unwitting tool for those who exploit protest for destruction. The one who emphasizes only the prohibition on fitna becomes an apologist for tyranny, silencing legitimate grievance in the name of stability. The Quran holds both in balance. Let us hear its voices. Firstly, the right to speak. Quran Surah An-Nisa, verse 148. The Quran does not command silence in the face of injustice. On the contrary, it explicitly grants the oppressed the right to raise their voice even when that voice is harsh, even when it exposes faults, even when it disturbs the comfortable. In Quran Surah An-Nisa, the chapter of the women, 4th chapter of the Quran, verse 148, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, God does not love the public utterance of evil speech, except by one who has been wronged, and God is hearing and knowing. Consider the structure of this verse. It begins with a very general principle. God does not love the public utterance of evil speech, al-jahru bis-su', the loud proclamation of that which is ugly, harsh or critical, overly critical. In normal circumstances, this is discouraged. The believer should speak gently, avoiding the exposing of others' faults, and maintain the dignity of social discourse. But then comes the exception, illa man dhulim, except by one who has been wronged or oppressed. The oppressed person is granted a license that others do not have. He or she may speak harshly. He or she may expose faults. He or she may raise their voice in ways that would otherwise be entirely discouraged. Why? Because silence in the face of oppression serves the oppressor. Because the one who suffers injustice and says nothing allows that injustice to prevail and to continue and to persist. Because the cry of the wronged is not ugly speech. It is the sound of a human being refusing to accept that wrong is right. In Tafsir al-Mizan, Allama Tabatabai, may God rest his pure soul, examines this verse with this characteristic precision. He says, and the references are all in the write-up, he says, his saying the Most High, God does not love the public utterance of evil. Public utterance of evil means manifesting words that are offensive to utter, such as obscenity, cursing, shaming, exposing faults, and such things. And he's saying, except by one who has been wronged. This is a decisive exception. The meaning is, it is permissible for the oppressed person to shout evil words against the oppressor. This includes cursing him, opposing him with harsh words, provided he does not lie, complaining about him, shaming him, or praying against him. The reference, like I said, is in the write-up. Allama notes that God does not love the public utterance of harsh speech, but Allah creates a legal exception, what we call istisna, for the madhloom, for the oppressed, the one who has been wronged. And the implication of this is truly profound. If a citizen is denied their rights, they are permitted, indeed they are encouraged, to speak out publicly, to expose the fault, to name the injustice, to demand accountability. This is not, as some people would have you believe, ghaiba, the forbidden backbiting that exposes private faults without justification. This is not bad akhlaq or bad etiquette that some people would have you believe, and it is not social impropriety. This is a mechanism of justice. The shout of the oppressed breaks the silence that protects tyranny. It forces the community to confront what it would prefer to ignore. It creates the pressure that makes reform possible. And God, the verse reminds us, is hearing and knowing. He hears the cry of the oppressed, even when the powerful wish to silence it. He knows the truth of the grievance, even when the official narrative denies it. The verse is a warning to the oppressor. God hears what you wish to suppress. And it is an encouragement to the oppressed. Your voice reaches him, even when it reaches no one else. Legitimate protest, therefore, is not merely permitted in Islam. In circumstances of genuine oppression, it can become obligatory. The principle of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, the enjoining of the good and the forbidding of evil, requires that the believer speak out against wrong. The verse in Surah An-Nisa that we just mentioned confirms that this obligation extends even to harsh speech, to public criticism, to the exposure of faults that the powerful would prefer to hide. The citizen who sees corruption and names it is not violating Islamic ethics. Rather, he or she is fulfilling them. But, and this is crucial, this license has limits. The verse grants permission to the one who has been wronged. It does not grant permission to the one who claims to be wronged, but whose grievance is manufactured. It does not grant permission to the one who exploits real grievances for the purposes of destruction rather than reform. The right to speak is real, but it is not unlimited, and it is precisely this limit that the next verse addresses. The prohibition of fitna, which is from Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, second chapter of the Quran, verse 217. If the previous verse established the right to speak, this verse establishes the boundary that speech must not cross. As I said in Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, second chapter of the Quran, verse 217, Allah says, and fitna is greater or worse than killing. Now this statement, as you look at it, might appear somewhat extreme. How can anything be worse than killing? Is not the taking of human life the gravest of crimes? And yet the Quran declares fitna is greater than killing. To understand this, we must understand what fitna means. Now the word fitna carries multiple layers of meaning. At its root, linguistically, it refers to the testing of gold by fire, the process by which precious metal is separated from dross. From this comes the broader meaning, trial, test, tribulation. But in the political and social context, fitna takes on a very specific meaning. Sedition, civil strife, the deliberate corruption of social order through the confusion of truth and falsehood. Fitna is not merely violence. Violence is qatl, killing. Fitna is something far deeper. Fitna is the destruction of the conditions that make ordered society possible. It is the shattering of trust, the fracturing of unity, the poisoning of the atmosphere so thoroughly that people no longer know who to believe, who to trust, and what is true and what is false. In a society afflicted by fitna, killing becomes easy because the bonds that restrain violence have been dissolved. In a society afflicted by fitna, justice becomes next to impossible because the shared understanding that makes judgment possible has itself been corrupted. In a society afflicted by fitna, even well-intentioned people become instruments of destruction because they cannot see clearly enough to know what they're doing. This is why fitna is worse than killing. Killing ends one life. Fitna destroys the conditions that make millions of lives livable. Let's have a look at what Ayatollah Jawadi Amoli says, the distinction between physical and spiritual death. In Tafsir Tasneem, Ayatollah Jawadi Amoli, may God protect him, approaches this verse with profound philosophical depth, distinguishing between two categories of destruction, the death of the body and the death of the soul. Ayatollah Jawadi says, Fitna is the imposition of disbelief and polytheism upon society and the stripping away of people's religious and ideological security. Killing is the stripping away of worldly and physical life, which is limited and temporary, whereas fitna is the stripping away of the spiritual and eternal life of a human being. Therefore, the Quran states, and fitna is greater than killing. This is because in killing, if the victim is a believer, he goes to paradise and only his body is destroyed. However, in fitna, the religion and soul of the society are plundered, and humans are dragged into the valley of disbelief and misguidance, the result of which is eternal punishment. Therefore, the poison of fitna, which kills the spirit of faith, is more effective and lethal than the sword which merely splits the body into two. The reference is, of course, in the write-up. Now consider the weight and gravity of this analysis. The one who is killed, if he or she is a believer, loses only their body. The soul continues. The destination, if a person was faithful, is paradise. The harm, though terrible, is temporary and contained. But the one who is subjected to fitna, who is confused, misled, dragged into disbelief and misguidance, loses something significantly greater. He or she loses his soul, loses their soul. Their destination becomes eternal punishment. The harm is not temporary, rather it's everlasting. And notice Ayatollah Jawadi Amoli's striking phrase, the poison of fitna, zahr fitna. The same word we've been using throughout our discussion on warfare. The sword splits the body. The poison of fitna kills the spirit of faith. The sword's damage is visible, immediate, and limited to its target. The poison's damage is invisible, gradual, and spreads to whoever it touches. This is why fitna is greater than killing. This is why the Quran places sedition, the deliberate corruption of a society's capacity to distinguish truth from falsehood, in a category more severe than murder itself. The individual murder is, of course, a tragedy. The murder of a society's faith, its trust, and its capacity for truth, this is a catastrophe, the consequences of which will extend into eternity. And next you have the obligation to verify. Surah Al-Hujurat, the chapter of the chambers, 49th chapter of the Quran, verse number 6. So the Quran does not merely prohibit fitna, it provides the antidote, the practice that protects the believer from becoming an unwitting participant in sedition. In Surah Al-Hujurat, the chapter of the chambers, 49th chapter of the Quran, verse number 6, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, And he talks to those who believe specifically. O you who believe, if a corrupt person, a fasiq, comes to you with information, with news, then verify it. فَتَبَيَّنُوا, lest you harm a people in ignorance and afterward become regretful. This verse is the Quranic vaccination, if we may call it that, against the information poison. The verse identifies the source of danger, the fasiq, the corrupt person, the one whose moral character makes his testimony unreliable. In the context of information warfare, who is the fasiq? He is the media outlet with a known agenda, the one that has been caught lying before, the one whose ownership serves foreign and nefarious interests, the one whose reporting consistently aligns with the objectives of those who wish to harm the community. He is the social media account that appears from nowhere, spreads inflammatory content and disappears when the work is done. He is the analyst, the pundit, who is funded by hostile governments, the human rights organization that applies its principles selectively, and the journalist who serves as a conduit for intelligence agencies. The Quran does not say ignore all news. No. The Quran says when the source of the news is a fasiq, when the source has demonstrated corruption, verify before you act. Tabayyun, the obligation to verify. The command is فَتَبَيَّنُوا. So verify, investigate, clarify. We studied this notion, this subject in great detail in our series on Tabayyun. I invite everyone to go to the website reflections313.com and to review those 15 sessions. This verification is not optional. The verb used is an imperative. It is an obligation. Before you believe the inflammatory report, verify. Before you share this outrageous claim, verify it. Before you allow your anger to be mobilized by what you have read, verify. The Quran even gives us the reason, lest you harm a people out of ignorance. Acting on unverified information does not merely make you look foolish. It makes you dangerous, harmful. It makes you an instrument of the very fitna you should be resisting. You think you're fighting injustice, but you're attacking the innocent. You think you're demanding accountability, but you are serving those who wish to destroy the system that, for all its faults, protects you. You think you're exercising your right to protest, but you've become a weapon in someone else's hands. And afterwards, the Quran warns you will become min al-nadimin, regretful, from those who are regretful. When the fog clears, when the truth emerges, when you see what you actually did while you thought you were doing something else, you will have great regret. But regret will not undo the harm. The bank you burnt will not be unburnt. The trust you shattered will not be unshattered. The society that you helped to destabilize will not miraculously restabilize because you are sorry. This is why verification is obligatory, not merely advisable, but wajib, obligatory. The believer who acts on unverified news from corrupt sources commits a major sin, even if the intention was good, and even if the grievance was real. The road to fitna is paved with unverified outrage. Let us now step back a little and see the complete picture. Surah An-Nisa, chapter of the women, 4th chapter of the Quran, verse 148, establishes the oppressed may speak out. Legitimate protest is permitted. Indeed, it can become obligatory. The cry of the wronged person is not silenced by Islam, rather it is protected. Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, the 2nd chapter of the Quran, verse 217, establishes, but there is a line. Fitna, the destruction of social order through the confusion of truth and falsehood, is worse than killing. Crossing from protest into sedition is not merely illegal, it is a graver sin than murder. And Surah Al-Hujurat, the chapter of the chambers, 49th chapter of the Quran, verse number 6, establishes the protection against crossing that line is verification. Before you act, especially when the source is suspect, verify. Acting in ignorance harms the innocent and serves the corrupt. This is the Quranic framework. It does not silence the citizen. It does not excuse the tyrant. It does not pretend that all is well when all is not well. But it also does not permit the exploitation of grievance for destruction. It does not allow the foreign agent to ride the wave of legitimate anger toward the overthrow of legitimate order. It does not sanctify every act committed in the name of justice. The citizen may speak. The citizen must verify. The citizen must not become an instrument of fitna. This is the balance. And it is within this balance that the distinction between legitimate protest and forbidden sedition becomes clear. The Quranic framework establishes the principles. Now we must apply them with precision. The citizen has a grievance. Prices have risen. Corruption persists. A policy has caused harm. An official has abused his power. The citizen wishes to speak, to act, to demand change. When does his action constitute legitimate protest, protected, even obligatory? And when does it cross into sedition, forbidden, even worse than killing? The line exists. The tradition draws it clearly, but in the fog of events, in the heat of emotion, in the chaos of the street, the line can be difficult to see. So tonight, we make it visible. Please give me a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The Arabic term is i'tiraz, objection, protest, the raising of a grievance. The Persian term is mutalebe gari, the demanding of rights, the insistence that what is owed be paid. Both terms share a common essence. The citizen seeks to correct a wrong within the framework of the system, not to destroy the system itself. Legitimate protest is the public expression of grievance aimed at reform. The protester identifies a specific wrong. The policy is unjust. This policy rather is unjust. This official is corrupt. This price increase is unbearable. This law is oppressive. He demands a specific remedy. Change the policy, remove the official, reverse the increase, repeal the law. He operates within a framework of shared values. He appeals to principles that both he and the authorities accept. Justice, accountability, the welfare of the people. Even they might accept it nominally, but they accept. And his goal is correction, not destruction. He wants the system to work better, not to collapse. Legitimate protest is grounded in one of Islam's most fundamental obligations. As we've said, Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar, the enjoining of the good and forbidding of evil. This is not merely a permission. In many, many circumstances, it is a duty. The believer who sees wrong and says nothing is complicit in the wrong. The believer who sees oppression and remains silent allows oppression to continue. The believer who sees corruption and does not object becomes, through his silence, a participant in said corruption. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his family and righteous companions, articulated this obligation in a tradition, in a hadith, transmitted across both Sunnah and Shia traditions, a rare case of nearly identical wording in both canons, confirming its centrality to Islamic ethics. First of all, the Sunni transmission, and the references, of course, are in the write-up. Whoever amongst you sees an evil, let him change it with his hand. If he cannot, then with his tongue. If he cannot, then with his heart. And that is the weakest of faith. And now the Shia transmission, and again, the references are all in the write-up. The Messenger of God said, whoever amongst you sees an evil, let him deny or change it with his hand. If he cannot, then with his tongue. If he cannot, then with his heart. For it suffices him that God knows from his heart that he despises it. The near identical wording across traditions is significant. This is not a sectarian teaching. This is the Prophet's instruction to the entire Ummah. The Hadith establishes a hierarchy, a ladder of response calibrated to capacity and circumstance. The hand, physical intervention, the direct prevention of wrong through action. In both Sunni and Shia jurisprudence, this level is traditionally understood as the domain of legitimate authority, the state, the police, those who have been granted the power to enforce. The individual does not have unlimited license to take physical action. Such action requires proper authority, lest it create greater harm than it prevents. The tongue, verbal intervention, speech, protest, the public naming of wrong. This is the realm of Nahi anil Munkar as it applies to the scholar, the activist, the citizen who sees injustice. It is here that legitimate protest finds its religious grounding. The tongue is explicitly named as a means of changing evil. And the heart, internal rejection, the refusal to accept wrong as right, even when one cannot act or speak. This is the bare minimum, the weakest of faith. The believer who cannot act and cannot speak must at least despise the wrong internally. And the Shia version of the Hadith adds the beautiful phrase, "It suffices him that God knows from his heart that he despises it." God sees the internal rejection, even when the external expression of it is impossible. The tongue, speech, protest, public objection, is explicitly named as a means of forbidding evil. The citizen who speaks against injustice is not violating Islamic ethics. Rather, he is fulfilling them. He is operating at the second level of the hierarchy, the level appropriate to those who lack state authority but possess the capacity for speech. And in Surah An-Nisa, as we've seen, God has granted the oppressed specific license to speak out publicly, even harshly. The combination of the Quranic verse and the prophetic hadith, transmitted identically across both major traditions of Islam, establishes therefore beyond any doubt, legitimate protest is not merely tolerated, it is commanded. The one who sees evil and has the capacity to speak against it, but remains silent, has failed in his faith. The citizen who protests genuine injustice through legitimate means is not sinning. He may be fulfilling, indeed, a religious authority. The tradition does not demand quietism. It does not sanctify every government action. It does not require the believer to pretend that wrong is right. It demands discernment, the wisdom to know what is truly wrong, the courage to name it, and the discipline to seek correction without causing greater harm. Now we look at the other side. The Arabic term is iqtisash, rioting, the creation of violent disorder. It is very closely related to fitna, sedition, the deliberate corruption of social order. Both terms share a common essence, the destruction of public order, security and trust, whether or not the participants intend this destruction. A riot is the use of violence, destruction and chaos in a way that harm the innocent, destroy public and private property, and undermine the security that makes normal life possible. The rioter may have a grievance, often he or she does, but his actions have detached from his grievance. He burns the bus, but the bus serves his own community. He loots the shop, but the shop belongs to his neighbor. He destroys the bank, but the bank holds his relative's savings. He attacks the police station, but the chaos that follows harms the vulnerable more than anyone else. The connection between grievance and the action has been severed. The destruction serves no reform. It creates only chaos, and chaos harms the weak far more than the strong. Now, riot and fitna are related but are not identical. A riot may be spontaneous. An eruption of anger, while destructive, was not necessarily planned or manipulated. Fitna for its part is strategic. It is the deliberate cultivation of chaos to serve a hidden agenda. But in practice, the two often merge. The Foreign Intelligence Agency does not create grievances from nothing. It finds real grievances and exploits them, takes genuine anger and steers it towards destruction. It infiltrates legitimate protests and transforms them into riots. The participant may not know that he is serving fitna. Indeed, he may believe that he is fighting injustice. But his actions, the burning, the looting, the destruction, serve an agenda he does not see. This is the tragedy of fitna. It turns well-intentioned people into instruments of their own destruction. Riot forms under several prohibited categories in Islamic law. Al-fasad fil ard, corruption upon the earth. The Quran condemns those who spread corruption on the earth. For example, we have a verse in Surah Al-Ma'idah, 5th chapter of the Quran, the chapter of the table spread, verse 33, and this is condemned in the strongest terms. Destruction of property, disruption of order, harm to citizens, these are forms of fasad. Harj wa marish, chaos and disorder. The tradition constantly warns against actions that create social breakdown. The harm of chaos falls disproportionately on the vulnerable, the poor, the elderly, the sick, the infirm, those who cannot protect themselves. And you have violation of al-Nas, a violation of the rights of the people. When a rioter burns a bus, he violates the rights of everyone who needed that bus. When he loots a shop, he violates the rights of the owner and the community that the shop serves. When he destroys public infrastructure, he violates the rights of all who depended upon it. The one who riots, the one who burns, loots and destroys, commits a sin, even if his original grievance was legitimate. The legitimacy of the grievance does not sanctify the means of expression. A person may be wronged. They may have every right to protest, but that does not give them the right to burn your neighbor's livelihood. That does not give a person the right to destroy that which the community needs. And that doesn't give a person the right to create chaos that harms the innocent. The ends do not justify the means. And when the means become fasad, corruption, destruction, chaos, the ends, regardless of how noble, cannot redeem them. So the distinction is clear in principle. In practice, the transition can be gradual, even invisible to those experiencing it. A protest begins peacefully. The grievance is real. The demands are legitimate. The participants are sincere. Then something shifts. Perhaps agent provocateurs infiltrate, professionals trained to escalate, to throw the first stone, to provoke the reaction that transforms assembly into chaos. Perhaps the authorities overreact, and legitimate anger at the overreaction spirals out of control. Perhaps the crowd psychology takes over, and individuals who would never burn a bus alone find themselves participating in destruction they would have condemned an hour earlier. Perhaps outside actors intervene, not visibly, but through social media, through funding, through coordination that the participants do not perceive. The protester who came to demand justice finds himself in the middle of a riot. He did not intend this. He did not want this. But he is here and the line is being crossed. What does he do? This is where Imam Ali's counsel, which we will examine shortly, becomes essential. The believer must have Basirah. This is the insight to recognize when the line is being crossed. And he must have the courage to withdraw, to refuse to be used, even when withdrawal feels like a betrayal of the cause. The cause is not served by fitna, rather the cause is destroyed by fitna. And the one who continues to participate after the line is crossed becomes, whatever his or her intentions, a participant in destruction. So now let's look at the practical tests. How does the individual know which side of the line he or she is on? Several practical tests emerge from this tradition. Firstly, the target test. Am I targeting the source of injustice, or am I harming the innocent? If my action burns the bus that my own community needs, I've crossed the line. Second, you have the proportionality test. Is my action proportionate to the grievance, or has it spiraled beyond any connection to the original wrong? If I am destroying everything in sight because of a specific policy, I have crossed the line. Next, you have the beneficiary test. Who actually benefits from what I am doing? If my actions serve the agenda of a foreign power who wishes my nation harm, I have crossed the line, even if I do not intend to serve these foreign powers. And you have the aftermath test. What will remain when this is over? If the answer is ashes, broken trust, and a weaker society, I have crossed the line. And the verification test. Have I verified the claims that are driving my anger? Or am I acting on unverified reports from sources I have not yet examined? Am I operating on bad assumptions? If I have not applied the context of Tabayyun, I may already be an instrument of fitna. These tests are not abstract. They are practical tools for the believer caught in confusing circumstances. Applying them honestly, and you will see the line becomes visible. Now we look at the tragedy of the manipulated. There is a profound tragedy in fitna. The manipulated rioter who often has a real grievance. His anger is not invented. His suffering is not imaginary. But his suffering has been exploited. Someone has taken his legitimate pain and weaponized it, not to address his grievance, but to destroy what remains of the order that, however imperfect, still provides some protection. He thinks he is fighting for justice. He is actually fighting against his own interest. He thinks he's striking at the oppressor. He is actually destroying the infrastructure his community needs and therefore becoming the oppressor. He thinks he's part of a popular uprising. He's actually a tool of a foreign intelligence agency who views him as entirely expendable. This is the tragedy. And it is why the Quran places such emphasis on verification, on discernment, on refusing to act in ignorance. The manipulated rioter is a victim, but he is also a perpetrator. His victimhood does not erase the harm that he causes. His ignorance does not undo the destruction that he participates in. He is both to be pitied and to be stopped. And the believer who has Basirah, that insight to see what is happening, has an obligation to avoid becoming this tragic figure. The cost of discernment is effort. The cost of absence is becoming an instrument of one's own destruction. Let's look at the classical sources, the tradition's guidance. But before that, please give me a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The distinction between legitimate protest and forbidden sedition is not a modern invention. It is not a reaction to contemporary events, crafted to serve present political need. It is embedded in the classical sources, in the jurisprudential texts studied in every hawza, in the sermons and letters of Imam Ali that have guided believers for 1400 years, in the collections of wisdom that distill the teachings of Ahlulbayt. Tonight we hear from these sources directly. We find that the tradition anticipated our questions. It provided answers long before we thought to ask. First of all, we look at Sharh al-Lum'ah. The book, Lum'at al-Dimashqiyya, the text that we encountered in session 57 a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, regarding the prohibition on poisoning lands, is one of the foundational works of Shia jurisprudence. Written by Shahid Awwal, the first martyr, and commented upon extensively by Shahid al-Thani, the second martyr, it remains a core text in Hawza education. In its treatment of Baghi, the rebel, the one who rises against legitimate authority, the text establishes a very crucial principle. It says, the rebel is not to be fought until dialogue is first initiated with him. His doubts are removed and his grievance is heard. If he has a legitimate grievance, it must be addressed. And the reference is in the write-up. Consider the weight of this ruling. The state is not permitted to immediately crush those who rise against it. The state must first engage in dialogue. The state must first attempt to remove doubts. Perhaps the rebels have been misinformed. Perhaps they've misunderstood. Perhaps they're acting on false reports, the very dynamic of Surah Al-Hujurat that we warned against. The state must first hear the grievance. And, most remarkably, if the grievance is legitimate, the state must address it. The rebel who has a genuine grievance is not simply to be suppressed. His grievance is to be remedied. Only after this, after dialogue, after clarification, after the hearing and potential remedy of grievances, does the question of force even arise if the rebel chooses not to listen. This ruling places a tremendous obligation on authority. Before you label someone a rebel, a baghi, have you talked to him? Before you deploy force, have you heard his complaint? Before you suppress the uprising, have you asked whether the uprising has a point? The classical tradition does not give the state a blank check to crush all opposition. It demands the state first examine itself, first ask whether the opposition has arisen because of the state's own failures, and it demands that legitimate grievances be addressed, not merely silenced. This is not softness on rebellion. The text is clear that after these steps, force may be used against those who persist in armed rebellion, despite having no legitimate grievance or despite having their grievance addressed. But the steps cannot be skipped. Dialogue before force, hearing before suppression, and remedy before punishment. When Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, appointed Malik Ashtar as the governor of Egypt, he sent with him a letter of instruction, a comprehensive guide to governance that remains one of the most remarkable political documents in human history, even to this day. In this letter, Imam Ali addresses how the ruler should relate to the people, including those who have complaints, those who are dissatisfied, those who wish to speak against the ruler's policies. In al-Balagha, letter 53, Imam Ali says, "Set aside for those who have needs from you a portion of your time in which you free yourself for them. Sit with them in a general assembly and be humble therein before God who created you. Keep your soldiers and guards away from them so that their spokesman may speak to you without fear." The phrase "without fear" is crucial. It means without stammering, without hesitation, without being nervous, without being paralyzed in fear. That comes from speaking truth to power while soldiers and armed people loom nearby. The Imam is commanding the governor, create the conditions in which people can actually speak to you. Remove the soldiers, dismiss the guards, humble yourself. Let the spokesman of the people say what he needs to say, without fear of retaliation, without anxiety regarding consequences, without the trembling that comes when power surrounds the speaker. The implication? This is a remarkable protection of what we would today call the right to petition, the right to protest, the right of the citizen to address his government. Of course, in the Western countries, we don't have this. The Imam does not say, because we're not sovereign countries, but that's another discussion. The Imam does not say, listen only to those who praise you. The Imam does not say, hear only the comfortable voices. The Imam says, create space for the uncomfortable voices. Remove the intimidation. Let the critic speak freely. This is the Islamic foundation for legitimate protest. The ruler who surrounds himself with guards and citizens when citizens wish to speak, who intimidates those who would criticize, who makes it dangerous to voice grievance, this ruler violates the explicit instruction of Imam Ali. The ruler who humbles himself, who dismisses the guards, who creates space for honest speech, this ruler follows the path of wilayah. And the citizen who speaks in that space, who voices his grievance, who names the injustice, who demands accountability, that citizen is exercising a right that Imam Ali explicitly protected. But Imam Ali also understood the danger on the other side. He understood that legitimate grievance could be exploited, that sincere protest could be hijacked, that the righteous anger of the people could be steered towards destruction. In Sermon 50, he describes the mechanism, how fitna actually works. He says, and of course the reference is in the write-up, he says, "Verily the beginning of the occurrence of seditions is desires that are followed and rulings that are innovated in which the book of God is violated, and men support other men in other than the religion of God. If falsehood were pure, unmixed with truth, it would not be hidden from those who seek. And if truth were pure, unmixed with falsehood, the tongues of the opponents would be silenced. But a handful is taken from this and a handful from that, and they are mixed. And there Satan takes hold of his followers." This is the mechanism of fitna, articulated with devastating clarity. Pure falsehood would be very easy to detect. No one follows obvious lies. Pure truth would by itself be irresistible. No one opposes manifest reality. The danger lies in the mixture. A handful of truth, a real grievance, a genuine injustice, an actual problem. A handful of falsehood, a manufactured narrative, a distorted interpretation, a hidden agenda. Mixed together, and in that mixture, Satan takes hold. The sincere person follows because he sees the truth in it. The malicious person hides because his falsehood is concealed within it. And the result is fitna, chaos, sedition, the destruction that serves no one except the enemies of the given community. This is why verification, tabayyun, is so crucial. And once again, I invite everyone to go and study and look at our 15 sessions on tabayyun. The fitna monger does not present obvious lies. He presents mixtures. He takes your real grievance, which may be valid, which is valid, and attaches it to a false solution, a destructive method, a hidden agenda. And you follow it because the grievance is yours. You do not see that the direction is his. The believer who wishes to avoid becoming an instrument of fitna must learn to separate the handful of truth from the handful of falsehood. He must ask, is my grievance being addressed or is it being exploited? Does this action remedy the wrong or does it create greater wrong? Who does this actually serve? These questions are the antidote to this mixture. The book Ghurur al-Hikam, a collection of sayings attributed to Imam Ali, provides a penetrating insight into why people become susceptible to fitna in the first place. Imam Ali says, and the reference of course in the write-up, the head of all seditions, of all fitna is desire, hawa. Hawa is desire, passion, the pull of the self towards what it wants, regardless of what is right. The Imam identifies this as the head, the ra's of all fitna, not the root, not the contributing factor, but the head, the leading element, the thing that drives all the rest. Why do people follow the mixture of truth and falsehood? Because the mixture appeals to their hawa. The grievance is real, but the response to the grievance is shaped by desire. The desire for revenge, the desire for destruction, the desire to see enemies suffer, the desire to overturn everything because patience is difficult. The one who has mastered his hawa can see this clearly. He can distinguish the handful of truth from the handful of falsehood. He can pursue remedy without destruction, justice without chaos, reform without fitna. The one who is ruled by his hawa, by his desire, by his passion, by his base self, cannot see. His desire colors everything. His passion makes him easy to manipulate. His anger makes him a tool. This is why the inner work, the jihad al-nafs, the struggle against the self, is entirely inseparable from any political work or activism. The one who has not struggled with his or her own desires will inevitably be captured by the fitna that appeals to those desires. The one who has achieved some mastery, who can pause, reflect, verify, and act from principle rather than passion, has at least a chance of remaining upright if God shows mercy when the storms of sedition blow. So let us gather what the classical sources have taught us over here. But give me a salawat before that, please. So firstly, from Sharh Lum'ah, the state may not simply crush rebellion. It must first dialogue, hear grievances, and address legitimate complaints. Only after these steps may force be considered. From Nahj al-Balagha, letter 53, the letter to Malik Ashtar, the ruler must create space for citizens to speak without fear. The right to voice grievance is protected by the explicit instruction of Imam Ali. And from Nahj al-Balagha, sermon 50, fitna operates through mixture, a handful of truth combined with a handful of falsehood. The believer must learn to separate them, lest he or she becomes Satan's instrument. And from Ghurur al-Hikam, the root of susceptibility to fitna is unmastered desire. The inner work of self-purification is inseparable from the outer work of political discernment or activism or anything. The tradition speaks with clarity. It protects the right to protest. It demands that the state hear grievances. It warns against the exploitation of grievances for destruction. And it calls the believer to the inner work that makes discernment possible. This is the classical foundation. Let's now quickly have a look at how it's been tested in history. The principles we have traced from Quran, they're not abstractions. They describe patterns that have repeated throughout Islamic history. Again and again, enemies who could not defeat the Muslim community on the battlefield have turned to a different weapon, the poisoning of minds. We see this in our own day-to-day. The exploitation of legitimate grievance, the transformation of internal tension into internal collapse. Let's now have a look at 3 case studies, 3 moments when this strategy was deployed against Ahlulbayt and their followers. The details differ, the centuries differ, the actors are different, but the pattern is identical. And recognizing the pattern is the first step towards not repeating it. So case study 1, Siffin, the Quran on spears. The year is 37 years after Hijrah, the Battle of Siffin. Imam Ali, the commander of the faithful, peace and blessings be upon him, leads the army of Iraq against Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. Muawiyah, who has refused to accept the legitimate Khalif and has raised the banners of rebellion in Syria. The battle is fierce. For days the two armies clash, and slowly, decisively, Imam Ali's forces gain the upper hand. Victory is within reach. The army of Syria is breaking. Muawiyah's rebellion is close to being crushed. And then a stratagem. On the advice of Amr bin As, Muawiyah orders his soldiers to get all of the copies of Quran that they have and raise them upon spears. The Book of God, they cry. Let the Book of God judge between us. This was not a sincere appeal to scripture. Muawiyah had shown no interest in the judgment of the Quran while he was winning, while he thought he could prevail by force. Only when defeat loomed did he suddenly discover piety. The Quran on spears were a weapon, an information weapon. They targeted not Imam Ali, but Imam Ali's own army. They exploited the sincere piety of the soldiers, of the Iraqi soldiers. Men who genuinely revered the Quran, who would hesitate to fight when the holy book was raised, who could be manipulated through their own faith, and it worked. A large portion of Imam Ali's army, men who would later become known as the Khawarij, demanded the fighting stop, saying, "How can we fight when they call us to the Book of God?" Imam Ali saw through the deception and he told them, the references for this are in the write-up. Imam Ali said, "I am the speaking Quran, and this is the silent Quran. They have raised it only to deceive you. Yesterday I called them to it and they refused. Today they raise it only because they see defeat." But the internal pressure was immense. The seed of doubt had been planted. The mixture, a handful of truth, being reverence to the Quran, combined with a handful of falsehood, the pretense that Muawiyah sought its judgment, had done its work. The fighting stopped, the arbitration was imposed, and from that arbitration came the fracturing of Imam Ali's coalition, the emergence of the Khawarij, and ultimately the assassination of the Imam that we commemorate on this night, on this day actually. Muawiyah could not defeat Imam Ali on the battlefield, so he defeated him in the minds of his own soldiers. He used their piety against them. He exploited their reverence for the Quran to make them betray the living interpreter of the Quran. This is information warfare. This is the poisoning strategy. The target is not the enemy commander. The target is the enemy's own people, their beliefs, their values, their internal cohesion. Turn them against themselves, and then you do not need to defeat them. They defeat themselves. Case study 2, Imam Hassan's army, rumors and bribery. The year is now 41 after Hijrah. Imam Hassan, peace and blessings be upon him, the eldest grandson of the Prophet, has assumed leadership after his father's martyrdom. Muawiyah marches against him with the Syrian army. Imam Hassan gathers his forces. On paper, he has the numbers, he has the legitimacy, he has the rightful claim, but he does not have a unified army, and Muawiyah knows this. Rather than risk open battle, Muawiyah deploys a different weapon, gold and whispers. He sends agents into the Imam's camp. They carry money, vast sums, distributed to tribal chiefs, to commanders, to anyone whose loyalty can be purchased. And they carry rumors. Imam Hassan is negotiating secretly with Muawiyah. Imam Hassan plans to surrender. Imam Hassan has already accepted terms. None of this was true. But truth was not the point. The point was to create doubt, to fracture trust, to make every soldier wonder if his commander had already betrayed him, and if so, why should he fight? The rumors spread, the gold changed hands, and Imam Hassan watched his army melt away. He himself was attacked. Commanders defected, tribal contingents withdrew. As I said, assassination attempts were made against the Imam himself by men who had been convinced through carefully planted lies that he was a traitor to his own cause. In the end, Imam Hassan was left with no choice except to lead a fractured, unreliable army into battle that would be slaughtered, or accept a treaty that preserved the lives of the followers and kept the principles of Islam alive for future generations. He chose the treaty. He chose wisdom over pride. He chose the survival of the message over the glory of martyrdom. And he knew the treaty would be violated. But the lesson nevertheless remains. His army was defeated before the battle began. Defeated not by swords, but by whispers. Not by strength, but by the poison of manufactured doubt. Muawiyah did not need to fight Imam Hassan. He needed only to dissolve the trust that held Imam Hassan's coalition together. He did this through the precise combination we have been discussing: money to purchase betrayal and lies to justify it. The lie gave cover to the bribed. They could tell themselves they were not traitors, merely realists responding to their leader's supposed surrender. The army collapsed from within, and the enemy walked in through the gates that the army's own members had opened for them. Now we look at case study 3, Mukhtar al-Thaqafi exploiting the oppressed. The year is now 66 after Hijrah. Mukhtar al-Thaqafi rises in Kufa to avenge the blood of Imam Hussein. His cause is righteous. The murderers of Karbala still walk free. Justice demands accountability, and Mukhtar, may God rest his pure soul, delivers it. He hunts down the killers of Imam al-Hussein. He executes Umar ibn Sa'ad, the commander of the army that massacred the Imam and his family and companions. He brings a measure of justice to a community drowning in guilt. But Mukhtar also does something else. He mobilizes what is known as the Mawali, the non-Arab Muslims, the Persians, and others who had converted to Islam but were treated as second-class citizens by Arab tribal aristocracy. Their grievance was real. The discrimination was very real. The injustice they suffered was real. Mukhtar gave them dignity. He elevated them. He told them, rightly so, that you are equal in Islam and I will treat you as equals. Mukhtar's enemies could not attack his cause directly. Avenging Imam Hussein was unassailable, so they attacked his coalition. They inflamed the Arab tribal leaders against him, not by defending the murderers of Imam Hussein, but by stoking fears about the empowerment of the Mawali, the Persians. Saying things like, he elevates Persians above Arabs, he threatens the natural order, he uses these foreigners against us. The grievance of the Mawali was real. Mukhtar's response to it was just. But his enemies weaponized that resentment of the resentment of those who benefited from the old hierarchy. They turned a question of justice, should the murders of Imam Hussein be punished, into a question of ethnicity and tribe. And when Mukhtar's enemies finally came for him, it was in his own city that had opened its gates. The very people whose sons had killed Imam Hussein, the very people who should have been the most ashamed and most supportive of Mukhtar's mission, were the ones who let the killers in. The people Mukhtar championed, the Mawali he had elevated, were scattered and powerless. In fact, there were battles that happened where they were massacred. The coalition had been fractured. The city had been turned against its own protector, and Mukhtar was killed, betrayed not by the strength of his enemies, but by his own people's manipulated fears. Mukhtar's enemies could not defeat his cause, so they defeated his coalition. They took a real tension, Arab-Persian relations, and inflamed it. They took legitimate anxiety about social change and weaponized it into the betrayal of a man who was delivering justice. The community that should have protected Mukhtar became the instrument of his destruction. This is the poisoning strategy. This is how fitna works. Not by attacking the cause directly. The cause may be too strong, too righteous, too obviously correct, but by attacking the coalition, by finding the internal tensions and weaknesses and inflaming them, amplifying them, by taking real grievances and anxieties and steering them toward betrayal. 3 case studies, 3 different periods, 3 different contexts, but one pattern. Step 1, identify an internal tension, legitimate grievance, a real anxiety and existing division. At Siffin, the sincere piety of the soldiers who revered the Quran. With Imam Hassan, the tribal fragmentation and suspicion that plagued the Iraqi coalition. And with Mukhtar, the ethnic tension between Arab and non-Arab Muslims. Step 2, exploit the tension. Introduce lies that inflame it, money that corrupts it, rumors that amplify it. At Siffin, the false claim that Muawiyah sought the Quran's judgment. With Imam al-Hassan, the false rumor that he had already surrendered. And with Mukhtar, the false framing that this was about Persian domination rather than the justice for Imam Hussein. And step 3, collapse the target from within. Let the enemy's own people destroy what the enemy could not destroy from the outside. At Siffin, Imam Ali's own soldiers forced him to stop fighting, threatening to kill him even. With Imam Hassan, his own army melted away and attempted to kill him. With Mukhtar, his own city opened its gates to his murderers. The pattern is consistent. The pattern is ancient. The pattern is still in use today. Let's have a look at the contemporary relevance. Every color revolution follows this pattern. Every regime change operation follows this pattern. Every destabilization campaign follows this pattern. Find the grievance, it is usually real. economic hardship, corruption, discrimination, political frustration. These are real and people genuinely suffer from them. Exploit the grievance, amplify it through the media, fund organizations that can mobilize it. Introduce agents who can steer it. Collapse the target. Let the people themselves tear down their own institutions, destroy their own infrastructure, and dissolve their own cohesion. Then walk in through the gates that the people themselves have opened. This happened in Libya, in Syria, in Ukraine, in countless other places where legitimate grievances were weaponized for geopolitical purposes. And it was attempted a month ago maybe in the Islamic Republic itself. Let's have a look at the January 2026 events. Let's have a look at this pattern in real time. The grievance was real. A speculative run on the Iranian rial, engineered and celebrated by US Treasury officials who openly boasted of their sanctions' impact, caused the currency to collapse. The cost of imports rose sharply. Merchants who dealt in mobile devices, laptops, electronics found their livelihoods threatened. The pain was genuine. The frustration was legitimate. And the people did what people have the right to do. They protested. The Bazaris, the merchant class that had been the pillar of Iranian society for centuries, came out to voice their grievances. The protests were peaceful. The demands were very specific: economic relief, policy adjustment, acknowledgement of hardship. And this is what the enemies of Iran did not expect. The government listened. Dialogue was opened with the Bazaris. Concessions were opened, were offered. The legitimate grievance was addressed through legitimate means, exactly as Sharh al-Lum'ah demands, exactly as Imam Ali had instructed Malik al-Ashtar. The protests began to peter out. The pressure was relieved. The system had done what a just system should do: listen to the grievance and respond to it with a solution. Now that should have been the end of the story. Unfortunately, it was not. As the legitimate protest was subsiding, a coordinated assault began. Sleeper agents were activated. Agent provocateurs emerged. Networks that had been dormant suddenly sprang to life, mobilized through Starlink satellite internet that bypassed Iran's communication infrastructure, until Iranian electronic warfare capabilities managed to block it entirely. The peaceful protests were infiltrated. The economic grievance was hijacked. And then the violence began. Reports emerged of gunmen shooting into crowds, not security forces defending themselves, but unknown actors creating chaos and casualties. This is all a matter of public record now. Videos surfaced of attacks on mosques, grenades thrown into spaces where teenagers, women and children were gathered. Police officers, many of them unarmed, were targeted with shocking brutality, beheaded and burnt alive, and the video evidence is there. The footage exists. This evidence is documented. A 3-year-old child was killed, not by the government, by the terrorists who had transformed an economic protest into a coordinated assault on the nation itself. More than 3,000 people died in the violence. And from outside of Iran, the vultures circled. You had Reza Pahlavi, the son of the dead Shah, living in exile in Maryland, dreaming of a restoration that the Iranian people rejected 47 years ago. He appeared on every platform calling for a revolution. The Zionist regime, desperate to distract from its genocide in Gaza, amplified every claim, manufactured every narrative, pushed for the regime change it has sought for decades. And the Orange Man, Donald Trump, speaking as though Iran were an American province rather than a sovereign nation, screamed threats, promised that help is on the way, and directly threatened the life of Imam Khamenei, which he did take. And for that, he will pay a price that no one can imagine. This is blatant interference, open incitement, the mask fully removed. And then came the lies. The legacy media, the same outlets that have minimized, justified, and ignored the genocide in Gaza, suddenly discovered an urgent concern for Iranian lives. They reported figures that defied basic logic. Consider. In Gaza, over 2 years of relentless bombing, carpet bombing, airstrikes, artillery, missiles, the full weight of one of the world's most advanced militaries deployed against a trapped population. The official documented death toll stands at approximately 60,000 to 80,000. We know the real death toll is higher, but this is the official death toll. Yet these same outlets reported with straight faces that more than 30, I've now heard 40 and 50,000 people had been killed by Iran in the space of 48 hours of street violence. Between January the 8th and January the 9th. 30,000 in 2 days in street clashes. Gaza flattened by bombs in over 2 years, 60 to 80,000. Iran in 48 hours of unrest, 30,000. The mathematics alone expose the lie. But the legacy media, the Epstein class media, repeat it. They amplified it. They treated obvious propaganda as credible reporting. Meanwhile, they said nothing about the police officers who were burnt alive and beheaded. They said nothing about the children killed by terrorist grenades. Nothing about the mosques attacked. Nothing about the coordinated nature of the violence that transformed legitimate protest into armed insurrection. This is information poison. This is the chemical weapon of the soft war. This is exactly what the martyr Imam Khamenei described. Propaganda that lingers in the heart, that casts doubt, that makes people pessimistic about each other, that serves the agenda of those who wish to destroy the nation. And what was Imam Khamenei, martyr Imam Khamenei's response? In the aftermath, Imam Khamenei addressed the nation. He distinguished, precisely as we have been distinguishing tonight, between the legitimate grievance and its exploitation. The economic pain was real. The people's frustration was valid. The government had a duty to hear and respond, and it did. But the coordinated violence, the foreign direction, the transformation of protest into terrorism, this was something else entirely. The people who came out peacefully to demand economic relief were not the enemy. The networks that hijacked their protests, that introduced weapons and chaos, that killed children and police officers and worshippers in mosques, they were the enemy. And the Imam made clear, Iran listens to its people. Iran addresses legitimate grievances. Iran will not be lectured on human rights by those who fund and support a genocide, who starve populations through sanctions, and who threaten assassination of national leaders and then do it, and then threaten the following leader by saying, oh, I don't agree with him. No, the nation held. The system survived and will always survive. And the plot failed. But the attempt revealed, once again, the pattern that we have been tracing, the pattern of Siffin, the pattern of Imam Hassan's army, the pattern of Mukhtar's betrayal, the same poison, but this time in modern bottles. So we've identified the pattern. We've seen it in history. We've seen it here in our own time. We see it in vivid color. Not in distant lands, but here, now, in events that are still unfolding as we speak. But identification is not enough. How does the individual believer navigate this? When the streets are full, when the slogans are loud, when the grievance is real, but the direction is suspicious, what does he do? How does the community protect itself? When foreign intelligence services have budgets larger than many nations, when media empires exist to manufacture narratives, when satellite internet can bypass national infrastructure and coordinate insurrection in real time, how does the Ummah resist? These questions have answers. The scholars have spoken. Let us listen to them. We have traced the distinction through Quran and Hadith. We have examined it in the classical texts. We have witnessed it tested in history. Now we hear from the living carriers of the tradition, the scholars who have applied these ancient principles to modern circumstances, who have guided the Ummah through the specific challenges of our age. Their voices converge on the same teaching we've been tracing. Their agreement confirms that what we have established is not interpretation but recognition, the inevitable conclusion that any honest engagement with the sources must reach. Firstly, Imam Khamenei, martyr Imam Khamenei, the red line is security. The martyr Imam Khamenei has addressed the question of protest and sedition with particular clarity. given the repeated attempts to destabilize the Islamic Republic through the exploitation of legitimate grievances. His teaching centers on a crucial concept, amniyat, security. He says, and the reference is in the write-up, security or amniyat is the red line. Without security, neither prayer is possible, nor fasting, nor trade, nor education, nor family life. Security is the foundation of everything. Consider this statement. Security is not merely a political good. Rather, it is a religious prerequisite. Without security, the believer cannot pray because he fears for his life. Without security, the merchant cannot trade because he fears robbery and chaos. Without security, the student cannot learn because institutions cannot function. Without security, the family cannot flourish because the basic conditions of normal life are absent. Every religious obligation, every social function, every human flourishing depends on the foundation of security. And therefore, actions that destroy security, that shatter the order which makes normal life possible, are not merely political crimes. They are attacks on the very conditions that allow the practice of religion itself. This is why the Imam draws the line where he draws it. Criticism, permitted, even necessary. Protest against specific wrongs, permitted, even obligatory in some circumstances. But actions that cross into the destruction of security, that create chaos, that dissolve the order upon which everything else depends, these cross the red line. The one who riots, who burns, who creates the conditions in which prayer becomes impossible, trade becomes impossible, and family life becomes impossible, this person is not exercising a right. He is destroying the foundation on which all right rests. Now we look at Imam Khamenei, freedom versus conspiracy. The founder of the Islamic Republic understood from the very beginning that the revolution's enemies would seek to destroy it from within, and he understood that they would use the language of freedom to do so. Imam Khamenei drew a sharp distinction. He said, and the reference is in the write-up, criticism is free, conspiracy is forbidden. Criticism is a gift for the officials. Conspiracy is a dagger in the back of the nation. The distinction is very precise. Criticism, the identification of faults, the demand for accountability, the insistence that officials live up to their responsibilities, this is not merely tolerated, it is a gift. It helps the officials see what they cannot see themselves. It corrects errors before they become catastrophes. It keeps the system healthy. The official who fears criticism is weak. The official who welcomes it is strong. Conspiracy, the coordinated effort to destroy, not to reform, to overthrow, not to correct, to serve foreign agendas while wearing the mask of domestic grievance. This is something else entirely. The conspiracy does not want to improve the system. It wants to destroy the system. The conspiracy does not care about the welfare of the people. It uses the welfare of the people as a weapon against the people themselves. The conspiracy is a dagger, and it's aimed at the back. It does not confront openly. It infiltrates, manipulates, and deceives. Imam Khamenei saw this clearly because he had lived through it. He had watched foreign powers attempt to strangle the revolution from its inception. He had seen the language of freedom and human rights weaponized by those who cared nothing for freedom or human rights, only for control. And he left this teaching for those who would come after. Learn to tell the difference. Criticism strengthens, conspiracy destroys. Welcome the first, resist the second. And then you have Ayatollah Bayazdi preserving the system. Ayatollah Bayazdi, may God rest his pure soul, one of the most influential scholars of recent decades, addressed the question of the believer's obligation to the Islamic system itself. His teachings may seem stark to modern ears, but it flows directly from the principles we have been tracing. Ayatollah Bayazdi says, preserving the Islamic system is among the most obligatory of obligations, even more obligatory than prayer and fasting, because without the system, the implementation of Islamic rulings is not possible. Constructive criticism that strengthens the system is wajib, obligatory. Criticism that weakens the system is haram, forbidden. The logic is very rigorous. Why do we pray? Because God commands it. Why do we fast? Because God commands it. But the implementation of God's commands, the actual living of an Islamic life, The existence of Islamic institutions, the possibility of Islamic society, requires a system, a structure, an order within which the commands can be fulfilled. Destroy that system and you destroy the vessel that carries the commands. Therefore, preserving the system is not separate from prayer and fasting. It is the condition that makes prayer and fasting meaningful in a social context. This does not mean the system is beyond criticism. On the contrary, constructive criticism, criticism aimed at strengthening and correcting, is itself obligatory. But there is a difference between the surgeon who cuts to heal and the assassin who cuts to kill. The constructive critic identifies the disease in order to cure it. The destructive critic identifies the disease in order to spread it, to use it as a weapon to transform a curable illness into a fatal collapse. The first is a doctor, and the second is a poisoner. And there is a big difference between the two. And Ayatollah Jawadi Amoli, the rights of the people. Ayatollah Jawadi Amoli, whose profound analysis of fitna we encountered earlier, has also addressed the question of how grievances should be addressed. His teaching emphasizes the principle known as al-Nas, the rights of the people, and how those rights are violated not only by the state but also by those who claim to fight the state. Ayatollah Jawadi says, and the reference is in the write-up, one cannot wash blood with blood. The one who, in the name of the people, destroys the property of the people has violated haqqun nas, the rights of the people. Public property, what we call Baytul Mal, belongs to everyone. Burning it is oppression against everyone. This is a massive and devastating response to those who justify destruction in the name of justice. You claim to fight for the people? Then why are you burning the bus that the people need? Why are you destroying the bank where the people's savings sit? Why are you attacking the infrastructure that the people depend on? The one who destroys public property in the name of the public has not served the public. He has oppressed, he has wronged the public. He has violated haqqun nas, the rights of the very people he claims to champion. And the violation of haqqun nas is among the most serious categories of sin in Islamic jurisprudence. God may forgive sins against himself, but he does not forgive sins against his servants, except by those servants' own forgiveness. The rioter who burns the city must answer not to God alone, but to every single person whose life he has damaged. And I was angry about justice will not suffice as an answer. Injustice is not remedied by a greater injustice. Blood cannot be washed with blood. And Ayatollah Mohsen Araki speaking about the fog of fitna. Ayatollah Mohsen Araki, may God protect him, amongst our teachers and a member of the Supreme Council of the Hawza, amongst other roles, has addressed the specific challenge of navigating fitna, the confusion that makes discernment so difficult. His teaching emphasizes the concept of Basirah, insight, the capacity to see through the fog. He says, and the reference of course is in the write-up, fitna means the atmosphere becoming dusty. Truth and falsehood become mixed. In such an atmosphere, the duty of the believer is Basirah, insight, to see with the eye of the heart, not with the outer eye. The one who lacks insight, even with good intention, may become an instrument of fitna. The image is powerful. Dusky, clouded, obscured. When fitna descends, visibility drops. You cannot see clearly. The familiar landmarks disappear. Friends look like an enemy. Enemies look like friends. In such conditions, the outer eye is useless. You need a different kind of sight. Basira, insight, the eye of the heart. The capacity to perceive reality when appearances deceive. But how is Basira developed? Through the inner work we have discussed earlier, the purification of the self, the mastery of desire, of hawa, the cultivation of a heart that is not easily swayed by anger, fear, or manipulation. Through knowledge, understanding of the sources, familiarity with the patterns, recognition of how fitna has operated throughout history. Through connection to trustworthy guidance, attachment to the scholars who have basira, who can see what ordinary eyes cannot. Without basira, even good intention is not enough. The sincere person who lacks insight becomes a tool. His sincerity is used against him. His good intention is weaponized. He thinks he's serving justice, but he's actually serving destruction. This is the tragedy of fitna. It captures the good-hearted along with the corrupt. And this is why Basirah is not optional. It is a duty. The believer must cultivate it or risk becoming, in his very sincerity, an instrument of the evil he believes that he opposes. So let us gather what we've learnt. We've seen 5 scholars. They've all said, Imam Khamenei, security is the red line, the foundation upon which all religious and social life depends. Imam Khamenei has said, criticism is a gift, conspiracy is a dagger. We must learn to tell the difference. Ayatollah Bayezdi, preserving the system is among the highest of obligations. Constructive criticism strengthens. Destructive criticism is forbidden and harmful. Ayatollah Jawadi Amoli, destruction in the name of the people is a violation of the rights of the people. Blood cannot wash blood. And Ayatollah Mohsen Araki, fitna creates a dusty atmosphere where truth and falsehood mix. The duty of the believer is basirah, insight that sees through the fog. 5 scholars, different emphases, different styles, but one message. The tradition speaks with clarity. Legitimate protest is protected, even obligatory. Sedition is forbidden, even when it wears the mask of justice. The believer must cultivate the insight to tell the difference. And the consequences of failure, of becoming an unwitting instrument of fitna, are not merely political. They are spiritual. The one who serves destruction while believing he serves justice has been deceived at the deepest level. And the cure for such deception is what we've been doing tonight. Returning to the sources, tracing the principles, learning to recognize the patterns. The poison has been identified. Next week, God willing, we apply the antidote. Please give me a loud salawat and we move to the conclusion and the supplication.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil.
So we set out tonight to diagnose a disease, and God willing, we have done so. We began by building a bridge from the physical poison that we established in sessions 57 and 58 to the information poison that operates on the same principles. Characteristics that are identical, indiscriminate, uncontrollable, and residual. Imam Khamenei named it, Imam Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, named it precisely. The influence of media is greater than the atomic bomb. Propaganda and lies are the chemical weapons of the soft war. We turned to Quran and we found the framework already established. The oppressed may speak, Surah An-Nisa grants the license. Legitimate protest is not merely permitted, it's protected. But fitna is worse than killing, Surah Al-Baqarah declares plainly. The deliberate corruption of social order, the mixing of truth and falsehood until no one can distinguish them, the destruction of trust, that makes the destruction of the trust that makes the community possible, this is a graver sin than murder itself. And the antidote is verification, as we're taught in Surah Al-Hujurat. When a corrupt source brings news, verify before you act. The one who acts in ignorance harms the innocent, serves the corrupt, and will be regretful. We heard from classical sources, from Lum'a, from Imam Ali's letter 53, from Sermon 50, all from Nahj al-Balagha, from Ghurur al-Hikam. We examined history and we found the pattern repeated. Siffin, Imam Hassan, Mukhtar. And in our own time, just a little while ago, the same pattern attempted again. The lies are amplified by the legacy media of the time. In the time of Imam Hassan, it was one thing. In the time of Imam Ali, it was something else. In the time of Mukhtar, it was something else. In our time, it's something else. And finally, we learnt from the contemporary scholars, Imam Khamenei, Imam Khomeini, Ayatollah Misbah, Ayatollah Jawadi, and Ayatollah Mohsen Araki. The poison has been identified. We know its nature, the corruption of truth, the exploitation of grievance, the transformation of legitimate anger into self-destructive chaos. We know its characteristics. We know its mechanism, the mixing of truth and falsehood. We know its historical patterns, Siffin, Imam Hassan, Mukhtar, and now in our time as well. And we know the tradition's verdict, fitna is worse than killing. Those who spread it commit a sin graver than murder. This is the diagnosis, but the diagnosis is not a cure. Next week, God willing, we apply the antidote. We will hear Imam Ali's remarkable counseling on navigating fitna, the teaching of the baby camel, grossly misunderstood many a time, that shows the believer how to avoid being ridden or milked by the corrupt. We will distinguish between the two types of people in fitna, the instigators who knowingly spread poison and the manipulated who unknowingly consume it, and understand why the tradition treats them differently. We will examine what emerges when the shield is finally lowered, when the defensive posture gives way to something higher. Makarim al-Akhlaq, the noble character, the positive demonstration of faith that is the believer's primary mode when persecution lifts. And we will address the question that many of us must face: what is our obligation in the West? That session will conclude the defensive movement that we began in session 55. And then, God willing, we begin to build. But for tonight, the work is done. The poison has been identified. May God grant us the Basirah to recognize it when we encounter it. May He grant us the strength to refuse it when it is offered. And may He protect this Ummah, and especially the Islamic Republic of Iran, in its current difficulties, and give victory to the entire resistance against the Epstein class, and give victory to all of humanity from those who seek to poison minds as readily as they poison wells. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate, O Lord of clarity, You who created light and separated it from darkness, You who sent guidance to cut through confusion, You who promised the truth would be made manifest and falsehood would perish, grant us sight in this age of fog. Grant us Basirah, the insight of the heart, when the outer eye is deceived. Grant us the capacity to distinguish the handful of truth from the handful of falsehood, even when they're mixed with the skill of centuries. O Lord, we live in the age of fitna. The atmosphere is dusty, clouded, obscured. Lies travel faster than truth, fabrications wear the mask of fact. The corrupt sources speak with confidence, and the honest voices are drowned in noise. We are bombarded, moment after moment, screen by screen, with mixtures designed to confuse. How do we navigate this, O Lord? How do we fulfill the command to verify when verification itself becomes a maze? How do we obey the Prophet's instruction to change evil with our hands, with our hands, our tongues, our hearts, when we cannot clearly see what is evil and what is counterfeit? We turn to You for Your guidance. We turn to the sources You have preserved. We turn to the scholars who carry the light in this darkness. And we ask You to illuminate our hearts, not our minds only, for the mind can be deceived by clever arguments. Our hearts, the seat of Basirah, the organ of spiritual perception, the faculty that knows truth when it encounters it, even when the mind is confused. We remember tonight those who saw clearly when others were blinded. We remember Imam Ali at Siffin. We remember Imam Hassan, and we remember Imam al-Hussein, and we remember Imam Khamenei, who drew the line between criticism and conspiracy. We remember Imam Khamenei, who has borne the weight, the martyr Imam Khamenei, who bore the weight of leading through decades of soft war. And we pray for the new Imam Khamenei, Sayyid Mujtaba, that he be given strength by You, O God, to continue this path. We pray for the Maraji of Qum and Najaf, who have preserved this tradition and applied it into circumstances that classical scholars never imagined. O God, bless them all, protect them, strengthen them, and grant us the humility to follow their guidance when our own sight fails. We remember tonight the victims of poison, those who participated in fitna thinking they served justice, those who burned, destroyed, thinking they were building, those who woke too late to find their hands had served their enemies. The Quran warned them, you will become nadimeen, regretful, and they did, and they do, and they will. O Lord, protect us from regret. Protect us from the tragedy of good intention in service of evil outcome. O God, receive all of those who have been martyred in the last few days. Receive them amongst the righteous. Count them among the martyrs, and at the head of them, Imam Khamenei. And let their blood be a witness against those who shed it, and those who incited, funded, and directed those who shed it. O Lord, we await the one who will end all of the fitna and all of the strife and all of the tyranny. We await the Imam of our age, the proof of Your existence, the one whose appearance will bring clarity to a world drowning in confusion. Imam al-Mahdi, may our souls be his ransom. When he appears, the fog will lift. When he speaks, truth will become unmissable. When he rules, the mixture will be separated, the handful of truth restored to truth, the handful of falsehood exposed and destroyed. O God, hasten his return. We are weary of the fog. We are weary of the effort to see when seeing is so hard. We are weary of the poison that seeps into everything, that turns brother against brother and makes the ummah a weapon against itself. Send us the dawn, but until he comes, we do not despair. Until he comes, we have the sources, the Quran, the Hadith preserved and transmitted. Until he comes, we have these scholars, the carriers of light. And especially now we have Imam Khamenei again. Until he comes, we have each other, the community of believers supporting each other, reminding each other, pulling one another back when we stray toward the fog. Until he comes, we have Basirah, imperfect, hard won, requiring constant effort but real. The poison is strong, but the antidote exists, and we have begun to learn it. O God, accept this from us. Forgive our failures of discernment. Forgive the times we were deceived. Forgive the moments we repeated lies without verifying, shared rumors without checking, allowed our anger to be ridden by those who wished us harm. And grant us, in the days to come, the sight we have lacked. Grant us the Basirah of Ali, the wisdom of Hassan, and the courage of Hussein. And grant us the connection to the Mahdi, whose appearance and return we prepare by seeing clearly in the age of fog. And may the peace and blessings of God be upon Prophet Muhammad and upon the family of Muhammad, and may God hasten their relief. Amen, O most merciful of the merciful. Amen, O Lord, sustainer of the universes. Wa akhiru da'wani alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.